I have seen you before, not with my eyes, those are too impatient, too easily fooled. I've seen you in the quiet moments when the world slows down and the heart remembers things the mind forgot. I've seen you in a stranger's smile that lingered a second longer than it should, in a passing glance that felt like recognition, not curiosity, in the calm that arrived without explanation, as if my soul exhaled and said, "There you are." This isn't about destiny wrapped in drama or love dressed up as poetry. This is about something simpler, truer, that feeling when you meet someone and nothing is loud, yet everything makes sense. I've seen you before in the patience I was forced to learn, in the losses that shaped me without asking permission, in the love I gave when it wasn't returned, and the love I withheld when I was afraid. Some people come into our lives like lessons, others come like mirrors. But once in a while, someone arrives like a memory, not from the past, but from somewhere deeper. And when that happens, you don't rush, you don't explain, you just stand there quietly grateful, knowing that love doesn't always introduce itself. Sometimes it simply reminds you, tonight this isn't a speech about finding love. It's about recognizing it. Because when love is real, it doesn't feel new. I have seen you before, and I say that without drama, without the need to convince you, because some truths don't ask for agreement. They simply exist, quietly, patiently, the way sunrise arrives even when no one is watching. And when I say I've seen you before, I don't mean in a photograph or in a crowded room or in the reflection of a passing window. I mean somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere untouched by time, a place where moments don't age and feelings don't fade, a place where recognition happens without names or explanations, where the heart knows long before the mind dares to ask questions. I have seen you in the pauses between breaths, in the stillness that settles when the world finally stops demanding attention. I have seen you in the calm that followed pain, in the silence after heartbreak when everything felt stripped down to its most honest form, when love no longer felt like fireworks but like warmth, steady and necessary, like something meant to stay rather than impress. I have seen you before in the way loneliness taught me patience, not bitterness, in the nights where I learned to sit with myself without distraction, without pretending that absence didn't ache because it did, but it also shaped me. It taught me how to listen, how to wait, how to recognize something real when it finally arrived. And maybe that's why when I met you, nothing felt rushed, nothing felt forced. It felt like recognition rather than discovery. Some people enter your life loudly, announcing themselves with charm and intensity, but you didn't do that. You arrived softly, almost unnoticed at first, like a familiar song playing from another room. And yet everything inside me leaned toward you, not because you demanded attention, but because something in me already knew the sound of your presence, already understood the rhythm of your energy, already trusted the quiet confidence of what you brought. I have seen you before in the love I almost gave up on, in the version of love that survived disappointment, not untouched, but wiser, slower, more careful. I have seen you in the moments when I chose to believe that love could still be gentle, even after it had been careless with me, and when you appeared, you didn't reopen wounds, you didn't test defenses, you simply stood there, and somehow that was enough. There is a difference between attraction and recognition. Attraction excites the senses. Recognition calms them. Attraction makes you want to move closer. Recognition makes you feel like you already are. And that's what this feels like. Not a chase, not a performance, but a quiet arrival, like coming home after being away for too long, unsure if the door would still be open, only to find it was never closed. I have seen you before in the eyes of strangers who made me feel understood for a brief second, in conversations that felt unfinished even after they ended, in moments that lingered without explanation, as if life was giving me previews, fragments of something that would one day be whole. And now, standing here with you, those fragments make sense, not as coincidences, but as preparation. Love doesn't always arrive as something new. Sometimes it arrives as something remembered, not remembered by the mind, but by the soul. And the soul doesn't speak loudly, it doesn't argue or insist, it simply recognizes, and when it does, there is no confusion, only a quiet certainty that doesn't need proof, only presence. I have seen you before in the way my heart learned to soften again, even after it promised itself it wouldn't, in the way hope returned without asking permission, in the way trust stopped feeling like a risk and started feeling like a choice I was willing to make, not blindly but honestly. And standing here with you, That honesty feels safe, not fragile, not exposed, just real. You didn't come to complete me, and I didn't come to complete you. That idea is too heavy, too unfair. We came whole, shaped by our own stories, carrying our own scars. And maybe that's why this recognition feels so calm, because it's not about filling emptiness. It's about sharing fullness, about walking side by side without trying to fix or save each other. I have seen you before in the lessons I didn't understand at the time, in the endings that felt cruel but were necessary, in the patience that was forced on me when I wanted answers immediately. Life was teaching me how to recognize you without ID, realizing you, how to see you without losing myself, how to love without fear disguised as intensity. Some connections are loud and short-lived, others are quiet and enduring, and this feels like the second kind, the kind that doesn't rush to define itself, that doesn't need to be proven to anyone else, because it exists comfortably in its own truth. And the truth is simple. I have seen you before, and seeing you now feels natural. I have seen you before in the way time seems to slow when you are near, not because it's dramatic, but because presence becomes easier, breathing becomes steadier, thoughts become clearer, as if the noise of the world lowers its volume out of respect for something real happening quietly. Love like this doesn't shout, it listens, it doesn't demand, it offers, it doesn't rush toward forever. It stands firmly in now, trusting that if something is meant to last, it doesn't need to be forced, it only needs to be honored. I have seen you before in the version of myself that refused to settle for less than sincerity, in the part of me that chose solitude over shallow connection, not out of pride, but out of respect for what love is supposed to feel like. And when you appeared, that respect felt justified. This isn't about destiny written in the stars or promises made too soon. This is about recognition built through experience, through loss, through growth, through learning how to love without losing clarity. And when I say I have seen you before, what I mean is I am ready to see you now, because love that arrives this way doesn't overwhelm, it steadies, it doesn't confuse, it clarifies, it doesn't distract from life. It integrates into it, becoming part of the rhythm rather than a disruption, and that is rare, and that is worth protecting. I have seen you before in the future I quietly hoped for but never described out loud, because saying it felt like tempting disappointment, and yet here you are, not exactly as imagined, but exactly as needed, reminding me that love doesn't follow scripts, it follows truth. And in this moment, there is no urgency to define what this is or where it goes. There is only presence, recognition, and the calm understanding that some meetings are not beginnings or endings, they are continuations. I have seen you before, and seeing you now feels like remembering something important that I didn't even realize I had forgotten. I have seen you before, not as a face I can place or a moment I can point to, but as a feeling that stayed with me long after moments passed, a quiet knowing that followed me through days and nights, through rooms full of people and stretches of silence where it was just me and my thoughts, and every time I felt that sense of familiarity without explanation, I didn't try to name it, because naming it would have made it smaller than it deserved to be. I have seen you before in the way my heart learned to recognize truth without urgency, in the way it stopped chasing intensity and started listening for calm. Because intensity burns fast and leaves ash, but calm stays, it warms without consuming. And somewhere along the way, I learned that love doesn't always arrive with chaos. Sometimes it arrives with peace, and that peace feels like you. I have seen you before in the moments when I chose to walk away from connections that demanded I become smaller, quieter, less honest. I didn't always understand why I couldn't stay. I only knew that something in me refused to settle, refused to pretend, refused to call comfort love just because loneliness was loud. And every time I honored that instinct, even when it hurt, I was moving closer to you. There were nights when the world felt heavy, when love felt like a story meant for other people, when disappointment tried to convince me that expecting sincerity was unrealistic, that depth was too much to ask for, but even then I held on to a quiet belief, not loud enough to call hope, but strong enough to keep me open, and now I realize that belief was shaped like you. I have seen you before in the pauses of conversation where words weren't necessary, in the shared silences that felt complete rather than awkward, in the comfort of being understood without explanation, because the truest connections don't require constant reassurance, they rest easily in mutual awareness, and that ease is something I recognize deeply. Some people teach you lessons by breaking your heart, others teach you by showing you what patience looks like, what consistency feels like, what it means to be present without performing, And before I ever met you, I was already learning how to recognize you, learning how to value steadiness over excitement, honesty over charm, depth over surface. So when you appeared, there was no confusion, only clarity. I have seen you before in the version of myself that learned to love slowly, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because love rushed is often love misunderstood. And I wanted to understand. I wanted to see clearly. I wanted to choose rather than fall blindly. And that choice led me here, to this recognition that feels earned rather than accidental. There is a certain way the heart responds to something real. It doesn't race, it settles, it doesn't panic, it breathes. And when I am with you, my heart does exactly that, as if it trusts the ground beneath it, as if it knows it doesn't need to brace for impact or prepare for loss, as if it understands that not every beautiful thing disappears quickly. I have seen you before in the love I imagine without daring to describe, because describing it felt like tempting fate, but still, I carried it quietly, a standard shaped by what I knew love should feel like. Not dramatic, not consuming, but supportive, present, real, and when you entered my life, you didn't overwhelm that vision, you aligned with it. Some connections feel like they are asking for something from you, attention, validation, reassurance, but this doesn't feel like that. This feels like mutual offering, like two people standing in their own truth and choosing to share space, choosing to walk together without pressure, without fear, without losing themselves, and that balance is rare. I have seen you before in the moments when I chose honesty over comfort, when I spoke truths that risked distance, when I refused to pretend that half love was enough, and those moments weren't easy, but they were necessary because they shaped my ability to recognize something whole when it finally arrived. Love that feels familiar doesn't demand explanations. It doesn't interrogate the past or rush the future. It stays present, grounded, attentive. It allows people to unfold naturally without forcing timelines or expectations, and being with you feels like that. Like a space where growth is allowed, not pressured. I have seen you before, in the way my heart softened again after it hard. Net itself for protection. Not because it forgot the pain, but because it understood that closing completely would mean missing something real, and that understanding led me to you, to this feeling of recognition that doesn't scare me, because it doesn't threaten who I am. There is no performance here, no need to impress, no need to exaggerate emotions to prove they exist, because what is real doesn't need proof, it only needs presence, and your presence feels honest, unguarded, calm, like something I don't need to question. I have seen you before in the love that taught me patience, that taught me how to listen, how to wait, how to trust timing without surrendering standards, and every lesson that once felt like delay now feels like preparation. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking love to save me, to distract me, to complete me, and started asking it to walk with me, to stand beside me, to share life rather than replace it. And when you appeared, you didn't arrive as an escape, you arrived as a companion. I have seen you before in the way my intuition grew stronger with every disappointment, sharper with every ending, clearer with every truth faced, until recognizing you felt inevitable, not lucky, not miraculous, just right. This kind of love doesn't rush toward promises. It doesn't demand certainty before trust is built. It allows things to grow at their own pace, secure in the understanding that what is meant to last doesn't need to be forced. And being here with you, Fee. LS, like that understanding in motion. I've seen you before in the moments when my heart felt calm instead of anxious, steady instead of restless, when love stopped feeling like a question and started feeling like an answer that didn't need to be spoken. And maybe that's what recognition really is. Not remembering a face or a moment, but remembering a feeling, a truth, a way of being that aligns so naturally with your own that it feels timeless. I have seen you before in the person I became when I learned to value peace over chaos, sincerity over excitement, depth over display, and that person recognizes you without hesitation. There is no rush here, no need to label or define, only the quiet understanding that some connections don't announce themselves loudly. They simply exist, steady and real, waiting to be noticed. I have seen you before in the future I allowed myself to believe in, not as a fantasy, but as a possibility shaped by patience, self-respect, and truth. And standing here now, that possibility feels present. This isn't about fate or coincidence, it's about alignment, about two lives intersecting at the right moment, carrying the right lessons, ready to recognize each other without fear. I have seen you before, and every part of me that learned to wait, to grow, to heal, understands why now feels different, why this feels calm, why this feels real. I have seen you before in the space between who I was and who I was becoming, in that quiet transition where old versions fall away and new ones haven't fully formed yet, a fragile place where honesty matters more than certainty. And it was there that your presence made sense, not as a surprise, but as a recognition, like something arriving exactly when the heart was finally ready to receive without fear. I've seen you before in the moments when love stopped being something I chased and started being something I allowed. When I learned that forcing connection only creates distance and patience, real patience creates clarity, and that clarity feels like you, calm, grounded, unafraid of silence. I have seen you before in the way my heart learned to trust itself again, not because it forgot pain, but because it understood it, accepted it, carried it without letting it harden into bitterness, and that softened strength is what recognizes you. Now, there were times when love felt like a language. I spoke fluently but never heard spoken back, times when effort was mistaken for depth, when attention was confused with care, and every one of those moments taught me something important, taught me what love is not, so that when something real arrived, it wouldn't be mistaken for noise. I've seen you before in the version of love that didn't need to be proven to anyone else, the kind that exists comfortably without an audience, without validation, without urgency. And when I am with you, that version feels present, not imagined. Some people make your heart beat faster, others make it beat steadier. And I have learned that steady is not boring. It is safe, it is strong, it is enduring. And that steadiness is something I recognize deeply in you. I have seen you before in the quiet courage it took to remain open after disappointment, in the choice to believe that sincerity still exists, even when experience tries to argue otherwise. And every time I chose openness over protection, I was unknowingly choosing you. Love like this doesn't arrive to distract or consume, it arrives to support, to align, to walk beside, rather than ahead or behind. And that balance feels familiar, like something I've been preparing for without realizing it. I've seen you before in the stillness that follows acceptance. When you stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting process. When you stop demanding answers and start listening for truth. And in that stillness, your presence feels natural. There is no anxiety here, no fear of saying the wrong thing or being misunderstood. Because understanding feels mutual, effortless, unforced, and that kind of ease is not accidental. I've seen you before in the moments when love felt less like fire and more like warmth, less like urgency and more like intention, and I learned that warmth lasts longer. It doesn't burn out, it stays. Some connections test you, others teach you, and some simply meet you where you are. And this feels like that. Like meeting without resistance, without masks, without needing to be anything other than honest. I've seen you before in the trust I rebuilt slowly, carefully, brick by brick, after it had been shaken, and now that trust stands strong enough to recognize something real without suspicion. Love doesn't always announce itself with intensity. Sometimes it arrives quietly, respectfully, asking for permission rather than attention. And that kind of arrival feels deeply familiar. I have seen you before in the future I allowed myself to hope for, without desperation, a future built on mutual respect, shared silence, gentle laughter, honest conversation, and emotional safety. This kind of connection doesn't demand answers about forever. It focuses on now, on presence, on choosing each other without pressure. And that choice feels clear. I have seen you before in the lessons that taught me self-respect, that showed me love should never require self-abandonment and standing. Here with you, I don't feel smaller, I feel seen. There is something powerful about a connection that doesn't need to rush, that trusts its own pace, that understands depth grows over time, and that understanding feels mutual. I have seen you before in the moments when my heart felt at peace with uncertainty, when love stopped feeling like a gamble and started feeling like a grounded decision. Some loves are loud and fleeting, others are quiet and lasting, and everything about this feels designed for longevity rather than excitement. I have seen you before in the way my soul learned to rest, to stop bracing for disappointment, to stop anticipating loss, and that rest feels safe with you. Love that feels familiar doesn't try to impress, it simply exists, confident in its truth, comfortable in its presence. I have seen you before in the patience I learned when timing wasn't mine to control, when waiting wasn't passive but intentional, and now that waiting makes sense, there is no need to perform here, no need to exaggerate emotion, because what is real speaks softly but clearly. I've seen you before in the version of myself that chose growth over comfort, honesty over convenience, depth over distraction, and that version recognizes you without hesitation. This connection doesn't ask me to forget who I am, it encourages me to be more of it. I have seen you before in the calm certainty that arrives when something aligns with your values, your experiences, your truth. Some meetings change your direction, others confirm it, and this feels like confirmation. I have seen you before in the belief that love should feel safe as well as meaningful, gentle as well as deep. There is no fear in recognition, only clarity, only presence. I have seen you before in the understanding that real love doesn't compete with life, it integrates into it. And standing here now, this recognition feels complete, quiet, and undeniably real.